Welcome everyone to Tech Uncensored. My name is Hetty Jones. There have been a lot of articles, opinions, perspective in how to effectively pitch to investors, what elements need to be included. But we have to remember that content is just one side of the equation. When you pitch to investors, you only have this small window to create a really good impression. How you pitch is going to be just as important as what you pitch. So delivering a compelling pitch is important for startups who seek investment, but it's also important for startups who are pitching to prospective partners or to a new customer. A well-crafted pitch can make the difference between securing funding, winning an important contract, and not really missing out on any of those vital resources. What we're seeing though, I guess even in my experience, is that a lot of startups fall short to make an impact. And why is this important? Because a compelling pitch is the first impression that you make to potential investors or partners. It can spark interest, it can create meaningful conversations, and can ultimately lead to some of the funding that's required for you to develop some success in your startup. While you need to adapt your presentation, your pitch always needs to be compelling regardless of who your audience is. And so today we're going to focus on how founders can actually enhance their pitch presentations. Once you've created your presentation, how do you frame your ideas around that content to create some of that interest? How can you engage your audience? How can you exude the same kind of passion that you had when you started your venture? And is there a difference between overly prepared and actually relaxing into the material that you already know? So how you articulate, your tone of voice, your body language, everything will make a difference in how you actually create that successful pitch. So I'm pleased today to be joined by Jody Yvonne. And Jody is the founder and chief strategy consultant for Say Strategies, which is a boutique public affairs firm. And he's had amazing experience both in the public and private sector. He's been a professor of philosophy and communications. He's worked in the legal sector as a communication advisor, head of public affairs at a nonprofit organization. And he's been a speechwriter and presentation consultant for a variety of clients, including some really notable ones like the Honorable Doug Ford, Premier Ontario and Toronto Mayor John Tory, as well as Stephen Harper and Canada's former Privacy Commissioner Chantal Bernier. And we're really honored that he's part of our client advisory team here at Altitude. So welcome, Jody.
Hi, Hetty. Thanks for having me. It's great to join the podcast today.
Thank you. We're honored to have you here today. So let's dig into you first, your experience, your area of specialization. This is an important topic for a lot of startup companies, and you as a communication specialist, this is something that you've done for your career. So tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, I mean, in my roles in the past, I've had the cause to be involved in a lot of different presentations on both sides, I would say, being a speaker at conferences and that sort of thing, as well as being a consultant to some other speakers, some very experienced and some not so much. So I've seen a lot of different presenters and seen a lot of different presentations and have a good sense of what works and what doesn't work in a variety of contexts. And like you said in the intro, I have had experience in both the public and private sectors. My experience with Altitude has been great because I get to see a lot of young, fresh companies who are starting. And I think that it's been good to be involved with, people that are just starting out, as well as having some of that experience in the past of people who are, well down the corporate path, let's say.
Okay. And so I was mentioning in your introduction about some of the notable clients that you've had. Can we talk a little bit about which ones do you want to talk about from the perspective of their pitch styles and what you found like interesting in working with them?
Yeah, I mean, my experience with some of these notable dignitaries isn't necessarily really deep, but one of the things that I found really interesting was in working with Doug Ford, let's say. One of the things that I noticed about him was he took the speech that was written for him, made it his own. So he added his own words and everything. But once he was happy with the final script, he pretty much stayed to the script and was very, what's the word, direct about it, and, really read from a script, so to speak. Someone like John Tory, on the other hand, he took the speech that was written for him and almost used it verbatim, but had a really natural delivery style. So even though the words were prepared for him, he had a style that really made it feel like it was coming off the cuff and, happening in the moment. And I felt like John Tory's approach was really effective in that way. So that was a big difference.
And I think with a lot of these, I guess, political figures, they've done so many speeches that after a while, it does become second nature to be able to understand what's in front of them and to quickly be able to form that into an influential delivery.
Yeah, I feel that it's very clear when you see, dignitaries, politicians, or even effective presenters speak. It's very clear who's sticking to a script and who isn't. I also have seen many times where, you get into a press conference and someone has a script that they want to stick to and they stick to the script. And then you get to a question period and you can see the change in style from when they're delivering their key message versus when they are, for lack of a better description, ad hoc responding to questions. I personally think that the best presenters are those ones who have that ability to present like the content is natural, it's coming off the cuff, but yet, in behind, that there's preparation. So those are the most effective speakers for me anyways.
Okay. So let's start off with really the first question. And maybe we're looking at this from a 10,000 foot view. How do startups actually miss the mark when it comes to delivering that presentation?
Yeah, so my experience is that, and this is completely understandable, is that a lot of startups and a lot of founders have a lot of material that they want to convey to their audience. So they're speaking to investors. They want to show investors that they know the topic, that they're, thought about all aspects of their business. And in their presentations, they almost end up becoming overly prepared in that there's so much information that they're trying to convey. You really only have, let's say it's a 15-minute presentation. There needs to be space for the presentation to breathe, so to speak. I find that a lot of startups try to cram too much information into that time frame. So that's one area anyways that I've noticed.
Okay. And what about the market research? And this is the one thing that's consistent with all presentations. Everybody goes through the TAM, SAM, SOM, the total addressable market. And sometimes that in itself has to be compelling enough to an investor to understand that there is a huge market potential for that business. Do you find that that is an area where startups can fall down on as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that there's a sense that often, so it's one of those things for me anyways, is that you almost have to have, it's not subtext, but it's sort of the information behind what you're presenting. My suggestion would be that the founders and startups need to have really good market research behind them so that they understand the market, they understand the potential, and that they can convey that to investors. But I feel like they need to be ready to answer questions to that. And it's almost like the iceberg thing. What they present should be a real concise synopsis of the market and the market potential. But then if they're questioned about it, they have all of this information that can corroborate what they're saying. So they don't need to get all of the information out in the presentation at that point when they're talking about market potential. But I feel like they really need to understand that thoroughly and be ready for questions.
Okay. So let's talk about what are the other elements that you think that startups in general don't have in their presentation?
Yeah, I think that, you know, from the ones that I've seen, again, it's too much information. I think that, you know, one of the things I like to see is a nice connection between the service or the solution that they're providing, the product that they're providing, and a real compelling story of why they came up with that and how they came up with that. I think that, you know, personal connections are important. And, you know, while investors obviously want to hear about the potential for a product or service, they want to see the viability of it in terms of the market, all of that kind of thing. I think if you can convey a personal connection to it and tell a story about why you came up with this, why it's important, that's going to make your presentation more compelling. Okay. So, and I don't always see that.
There's this. So I think that the important thing that I think is really important is about the connection to the audience, and sometimes startups who are so focused on delivering a great presentation sometimes don't necessarily empathize with how their presentation is being received. So they may not necessarily pivot or, you know, adjust in accordance with, let's say, an investor who may be like looking down and, you know, at his cell phone and not paying attention. So what, from that perspective, have you seen that? And if and when you've seen that, what is a founder who is presenting to do when they see that lack of engagement?
Yeah, I think sometimes that lack of engagement comes from, you know, partly it's the presentation and the presentation itself, the presentation style. I've seen, again, this goes back to, you know, information overload. I've seen presentations where each slide has, you know, 12 different points on the, you know, written out on the slide. And essentially, you know, the presenter is reading the points that are on the slide. That's the first thing to make an audience, you know, stop paying attention to what you're presenting. I would much rather see, you know, a visual slide. Maybe there's a key point, but then the talk that goes with that slide is, you know, expansive. It expands on the points that are to be made. You know, you really shouldn't have text heavy slides. I think that ends up creating, you know, that lack of engagement.
Okay.
So startups should, and founders as they're presenting, should be ready to think, okay, well, what does this slide do? How does the slide enhance my presentation, or how does it help me drive a point home? Too often people use the slides as, you know, their guide to every point that they want to make. So yeah, I mean, the best presentations I've seen are you know, presentation decks that are, you know, maybe 8 to 10 slides at the most. It's not, you know, 35 slides to support every single point. They're really there to just support what it is you're trying to convey and to talk about with your audience.
Okay. So we're going to get much deeper, I think, later in a question when we talk about how the slides actually work with the delivery. But like, from your perspective, when we talk about clear, concise, compelling narrative, We're also talking about how to develop, let's say, a really good elevator pitch, because I think that this is one area that a lot of startups cannot necessarily answer. If you say, what do you do and how are you changing the world? You get stuck in an elevator with an executive going up to the 10th floor, and you have to be able to get him to be on side in that amount of time. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that really, it sounds easier than it is. I think that, presenters, and in this context, startups and founders, really need to think hard about that kernel, that key message of what it is that they are trying to accomplish. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit later as well, but I feel like, of course, investors want to know, like, how the company is going to be viable. How is this, how is this endeavor going to make money? All of those kinds of things. But I really like that sense of connecting to your product or service, the solution that it's providing, like what good is it bringing to the world, and finding that kernel of goodness, so to speak, to say, this is what I'm all about. This is what my company is all about. So I think that finding that elevator pitch is finding that kernel, and that's important.
And I think that is the start of, okay, now I get what you do. And if somebody leans in and says, that's amazing, then that could lead to further interest in engaging with you. Now, so let's talk a little bit about preparation, because you can have all the elements that you need to get to that tight, concise 10-page deck. How does this come out in the presentation? Because you talked about the elements that need to be there, so that there's more visuals. There's this interplay between what's being said on the script versus what's being shown on the screen. Tell me about some of the problems that could happen when it comes to being overly dependent on your slides.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I don't want to say you don't be overly prepared. I don't want to say that, because it's important to be thoroughly prepared when you're presenting, but to make good decisions around the information that you want to present. I would say that it's impossible to present every little bit of information that you have about your own company to investors. So that's where you need to, like, create those key moments. And it's those key moments that you want to engage your audience on, that you should focus for the presentation. Now, if there's questions, then you have all of this other material that you can pull from, but you actually don't, try to cram it all into one presentation. And what I've seen from some of the presentations so far is there's, I mean, I've seen good ones and bad ones. There is a sense of trying to get out a lot of information. And so what I find is there's this overdependence on the slides, trying to say everything that's on the slide. It ends up resulting in presenters often speaking very fast. And so it just becomes this ramble of words, and you don't get to those moments. I would rather see someone, calmly and compellingly give me 2 points than ramble off 10 points about their business. Of course, each founder and each presenter has to make, good decisions about what those key points are. But yeah, that's the one thing I've seen is a lot of information coming out quickly, and it becomes very hard for your audience to attend to all of those points. Whereas one or two key messages is where you want to be.
I think that's a good point to have, but I think from a startup founder's perspective as well, they are only given, let's say, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, like you say. So they have, let's say, rehearsed that speech probably 100 times over to make sure that they can get all that material within that time frame. And I think that's a huge part of why they are rigid in how they present, because they've done it 1,000 times. They know it works. And when push comes to shove, and let's say something happens and suddenly they don't have the time that they thought that they had, it's hard for them to flex. Do you find that, or have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, again, the best presentations I've seen, they provide some space for a little bit of, I don't want to say audience interaction, because you're not in a presentation, especially in investment, in investor's pitch, you're not necessarily going to have this back and forth with your audience throughout the presentation. But I would say, think about that as you're structuring it, so that instead of, this talking head that's saying, 50 points to your audience within the space of a few minutes, that you can kind of ask a guiding question. And that guiding question helps you get to the key point that you want to make in that section of the presentation. I think that that's an effective strategy when you're trying to engage your audience. So it's like, have you ever experienced this kind of situation? Well, our product and service, we recognize that same solution, and our product and service, we recognize that same problem, and our product or service helps solve that problem. There's moments in your presentation where you can ask questions, you can tell a story, you can, try to engage the audience on a general point, and then drill down to the key point that you have for that section. And I think that that's important to think about as you're putting your deck together.
So let's dive in a little bit into what is effective storytelling. Can you define it and just tell me why it's played such an important role over time in effective presentations?
Yeah. Defining it might be a little bit of a longer conversation, but
that's okay.
Yeah. I think that, storytelling has become important because it's the way that we understand ourselves. It's the way that we understand the world. Often, stories follow this kind of linear narrative where, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a resolution, there's all of that sort of stuff. I think with where business is concerned, people like to see that connection to a specific topic. So again, the best speakers that I've seen and the best presenters that I've seen often use a story as a lead-in to their presentation, and they reveal something personal about themselves, and then that is connected to the topic at hand. And I think when your audience feels that personal connection, they know that you're invested in what you're doing, then they become invested in what you're doing. And it's this sort of interplay between how the audience feels about the topic and how you feel about the topic. And again, the best speakers, they convey that passion that they have. And in the ideal case, the audience starts to feel that passion. And, like I say, the best presenters end up leaving you feeling inspired or, sharing in that passion. And so I think storytelling really is a good way for that to come about. And that's why storytelling in business has become so important, is because we're always looking to get our audience, engaged and get them to feel the passion that we have. And, if you can get them on your side that way, then, you've won the battle, to be honest.
Now, you told me earlier about some newcomer success stories, and can you convey some of those stories? I think one of them was with Tariq Haddad from Peace by Chocolate. I'd love the audience to hear that.
Yeah. Tariq was a very compelling presenter for me. You know, and when I heard his story, I'm sure some of our audience listening to the podcast today knows who Tariq is. But he's not the only one. I mean, in my past, have had the opportunity to listen to newcomer entrepreneurs do their presentations or speak about their experience. And what I've found most compelling is those moments where they talk about what was happening in their personal life, what their business challenges were, how those things kind of came together. Sometimes the push and pull between those things, their personal life and their business aspirations, to kind of create this moment of inspiration for their audience. And I mean, I've left some of those presentations, you know, listening to newcomers to Canada speak about, you know, their rise in Canada, their rise through the corporate ranks, or the success of their business, and like feeling really emotional about it. Like, wow, what they went through, and, you know, the impact that it had on their families or the people around them. Often some of the challenges that they had to overcome. And that is, you know, like I say, I left those presentations feeling emotional and often inspired, you know, so that in my own life, if I, you know, I watched this presentation and saw someone overcome these challenges, can I overcome challenges that I encounter as well? And, you know, often I feel, you know, leaving those presentations that, yeah, I can do it. It's something that shows me I can overcome those challenges. And I find that those presentations have been really, really effective. If there's an inspirational moment that you can kind of seize upon. So yeah, I found the newcomer story often really engaging that way.
So, and they were obviously memorable to you, and they serve as use cases for what's considered an impactful and inspiring message. So, for founders, what would you say they should do when taking consideration some of these great examples, like when they're trying to convey their message?
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? Because, you know, I think in an investor's pitch, you're not really going to get into a deep story about yourself and your own challenges and that. There are moments where you can make some of those connections. Partially, it's about, you know, a founder, you know, most presentations will have that connection about why them and their team are the right team to bring this business forward. And so I think in that moment, there's a chance to kind of make a personal connection and say, my business experience, my personal life, these are the things that have contributed to me being in this position and wanting to make this business go forward. You know, so it's striking a balance. I don't have anything specific that I can say, you should do this in terms of your own personal story, but I would say, like, as you're developing your presentation and your pitch, to find that connection in terms of why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I find that with a lot of pitches that we see, and this is some of the advice that I've heard investors give as well, is that the storytelling should be at the beginning, because they want to understand your motivation and how you develop this product or service. And many times it is that personal connection to whatever problem you personally were having that actually led to this. And that's what makes the difference between an investor doing this and an investor leaning in.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I think that at the beginning is a great time to make that personal connection and tell that story. One good example, Hessie, that you and I have talked about previously, is if I can talk about them a little bit,
Sure.
is that you know, a young company that I've started to do some work with, CRISPR. They sell zero waste plant-based kits, meal kits, and you know, I just found that the founder, Kieran, was really compelling because he told this story about, you know, he was a young guy. He was donating his time to a food bank, and told this story about how he was unpacking some donations that had been made to the food bank. And he was realizing that these donations were made by another meal kit service, and everything was wrapped in plastic. Every little utensil, everything that came in that kit was sort of single-use plastics. And he was, so here's a young guy, doing something good, socially good, by volunteering at a food bank. And then he saw these single-use plastics and came up with the idea of a zero-waste plant-based meal kit. That's a compelling story for me. And to be able to tell that story at the beginning and say, this was my inspiration for creating a new kind of meal kit that didn't use all these single-use plastics, that to me is really compelling. And that's where, Kieran at the beginning of his presentation could start with that personal story of, hey, I experienced this and this is why I came up with this solution. And I find that that's a really engaging moment. So for other founders out there, if you can come up with that moment, then that's a great way to kind of enter into your presentation.
Okay. So let's talk about the delivery itself, because being able to create these impactful moments and make them memorable means that your delivery has to be spot on. So can we talk a little bit about that? The pacing of words. What does confidence and passion actually look like?
Yeah. So, I said earlier here in the podcast that I've seen a lot of presentations where, because the speaker is trying to get out a lot of information, they're speaking so fast. It's better to slow down, be calm, try to be engaging. Don't say too much. It's, again, think of those moments where you can pose even if it's a rhetorical question, you pose the rhetorical question, then you make your key points. So I would say focus on pacing. Nervousness starts to make you speak more quickly. You tend to want to make as many points as you can about your product or service. Just be really focused on having a key message at each section and conveying that, confidently. Now, what confidence looks like and sounds like, that's a tough thing. People tend to get nervous in a presentation. If you know your material well, lean into that. I would say project your voice. It's, if someone is nervous, they'll tend to close off in terms of their body language and their voice. They won't project as much. Roll your shoulders back, speak, stand tall, speak strong, speak loud. Those are good key things, I think, to focus on your delivery style anyways. There are other things that you can think of, Hessie?
I'm thinking smiling makes a big difference. I think sometimes, and I had a psychology teacher say this one time, if you can't feel a certain way, but you want to feel a certain way, then do the behavior. So do the behavior and get the action, feel the behavior. And so if you smile, that might help you calm down a little bit. And then it will also at the same time bring your audience in.
Yeah, I agree with that. And maybe one thing we haven't talked about is gestures or like body positioning and, kind of body language. One thing to certainly be aware of is, are you swaying back and forth? Are you kind of fidgeting with your hands? Maybe there's papers that you're, moving around. Right. Try to keep that down. I would say hand gestures are a really good thing. And, I'm no expert in terms of, the psychology of body language, but I just know that gestures of openness when you're opening your hands to your audience, that will, in a kind of compelling way, make them feel connected to you a little bit better. Your hand on your chest, if you're saying something that you believe in, those are all things that can help you drive your points home or to appear more confident and really, again, in a subtle way, engage the audience and have your audience be more open to your message.
Would you say that you could have too many hand gestures? There are people who like have their arms flailing all over, and I think sometimes I'm like that, and then I'm almost compelled to hold my hands together to stop myself from actually doing gestures. Like, what
Yeah,
is
you know,
the right number of or right amount of gesturing to be done during a
yeah,
presentation?
yeah, that's a hard thing. Again, I go back to like that sense of being natural. And it's a hard thing to say, like, okay, you're going to be natural with your speech, but I would say like you don't want it to be scripted. You don't want to have so many hand gestures that everything feels like it's scripted, and I've got a hand gesture for every point that I make. Rather, just have a sense of how can I use hand gestures to invite my audience in. At key points in your presentation, there may be ways that if you're really trying to hit a point, then you're, making an appropriate gesture. If you're inviting them in, you're, making those kinds of gestures, but you don't want it to be scripted, and you don't want it to come off as, contrived.
Okay. So what about the podium? Because some people you will use that as a crutch for the presentation, and it's a way sometimes to hide their nervousness.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
Again, every presenter is going to have to do what they're comfortable with. My feeling is that it's nice to pick some moments in your presentation to step away from the podium. That's a part of audience engagement again, where if you have a moment where you've made 3 or 4 different key points, and then you want to pose a question, then maybe that's a good time to step away from the podium, and you're looking into the eyes of your audience and you're asking a question, or you're making a point. Those are opportunities, I would say. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. Look for opportunities in your presentation where you can step away from that podium and maybe walk back and forth a little bit, but it should be purposeful. It should be a signal to a key part of your presentation.
Okay. So let's go to the last part where your presentation is completed. And like you said, this probably could be one of those moments where you could step away from the podium, and now you're into question period. What should founders be prepared for? Especially if you take it from the perspective of the investor and what he is going to be asking, what is he going to be looking for? What should the founder know at this stage?
Yeah, so there's a few different things, that I think that is required of the founder for this section. So one certainly is mindset. I mean, I think that we've talked a little bit about going into this, like your presentation is done, you're asking a question. You need to have the mindset that when someone asks a question, they're not trying to attack you. They're not trying to necessarily, find problems with your business, your service, your presentation, the opportunity. What they're really doing is expressing genuine interest in your business. And if you have that mindset, it'll help you deal with any questions, I think, much more positively. So you're not feeling attacked. You are saying, they want to know about my business, and here's my opportunity to tell them even more than I've already done. So I think that's important.
Okay, so that speaks to investors who may ask a question and may not necessarily get the response they're looking for. So they may dig in, ask another question. But from an investor perspective, they want to know that you're open to other possibilities. They want to know that you're coachable. And from your perspective, from the founder's perspective, when you say they don't want to feel attacked, the investor wants to perceives that as, are you being defensive? So Um, you're right. They want to find out more information from the founder, but they're also getting these little social cues about potentially what it could be like if they end up investing in this one founder.
Yeah, my response, I agree with you, Hesse, and I think that my thoughts on that are, don't be afraid of those moments. Really dig into those moments and clarify. If you don't understand a question, or you can't answer it right off the cuff, take the time to clarify and ask questions of the questioner. Say, is this what you mean? How can I, help help you understand where we're going with this? I think that digging into a question shows that you are ready to work on it, that you've thought about the different aspects of your business. As you say, that you're open, that you're coachable, that you can work with investors. So I would say, like, don't be afraid of those moments, and don't be afraid if you don't have all of the material, or you don't have an answer ready at the moment. Of course, you need to know your material cold, but like I say, be willing to dig into a question if you don't know the immediate answer. I think that leaves with a good impression.
The one thing that I've seen during question period is where a lot of startup founders will have a whole bunch of appendices, slides where they've anticipated where some of the questions could come from. And when the question is asked, they will go to let's say, that financial slide. And they almost, I would say, sometimes believe that slide is going to pull out the answer that the investor is looking for. Do you feel that founders are more likely to depend on a slide content to answer that question, as opposed to answering the question himself?
Yeah, I think that there's a feeling that if I've got this material on a slide, I've thought about the question, and I have an answer ready for you. Investors are asking the question as a conversation. They want to hear you respond to their question, and they want to hear you deal with that question effectively. And I think that, there's on one hand, it's like, okay, you see, I've thought about this question, and I've got the material up on the screen. I would rather hear a conversation where you are answering the question confidently, and I think that's more effective for me.
Okay.
It really, that final question period is that chance to have conversations with your investors, and be engaging. Show them that you've thought about the business through and through, and I think that'll be more effective.
I'm finding that, and this was me years ago when I've had to present in front of investors, is that the material so cold that you almost don't have to worry about knowing it verbatim and delivering it verbatim. And it becomes almost like this knowledge repository that you could just pull out anecdotes or pull out material without having to really do it in a way that's rehearsed, because it's already there.
Yeah, that is the ideal point to which you want to get. And Hesse, again, off camera, you and I talked a little bit about some of the presentations we've already seen. And there was one, again, in particular, I'm not going to bring up the name. I'm not going to remember the name, but I just want to say that, like, she was really knowledgeable about her area. So she had developed a business where she had already spent years in retail, in developing product and that sort of thing. And so she was a really knowledgeable presenter. When she presented, she was very kind of tight to her script. She had a lot of information, and it wasn't that it was bad, but it was just, you could see that she had a lot of information and was, again, very script oriented. But in that presentation, when she went off script and during the question period, when people started asking her questions, it's almost like the whole thing opened up and she just blossomed in that moment because she knew the material so well, but she was answering naturally and off the cuff. And you could, and that to me is when, oh, this is, I got the feeling that like, this is not rehearsed. She really does know her information, and it's coming across so much more effectively when she was speaking naturally than when she was kind of sticking to her script. And that was just one, presentation that I saw that. So that question period, I think, is a real important moment for, like I say, investors to know that you know the material and that you can speak about it with passion and with confidence and, all of that stuff.
That would be the panacea. And
yes.
I think a lot of founders have it in them. There's a reason why they became a founder in the first place. And there's always one little thing that catalyzes somebody's move to do what they do. And if they can continue to articulate that story, they have the passion, they have the confidence to be able to deliver that time after time, then it should become easy for them, ideally.
Ideally, that is the ideal point to get to, for sure.
So thank you. I think we covered so much today, Jody, and I'm so glad that you help us break down some of these fundamentals, because this is an area that not many people talk about. They more often talk about what an investor needs to see. But if there's a point of trying to engage and trying to influence, it's how you deliver your material. So thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure to be here. I hope it's been helpful. Thanks for having me, Hessie. This has been great.
No problem. And for our audience, this is indicative of the type of topics that we cover in our investor readiness program. As we indicated, Jody is one of our client advisors, and he helps many of our clients develop not only their perfect pitch style, but provide them with the tools necessary to actually improve their pitch to investors from a content perspective. So for more information about our program, please go to altitudeaccelerator.ca. We're always exploring new topics. So if any of you have any suggestions on the topics that you'd like to see within Tech Uncensored, please email us at communications@altitudeaccelerator.ca. Last thing, Tech Uncensored is powered as produced by Altitude Accelerator, and we're hosted on Spotify. So you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, everyone, my name is Hessie Jones. This is Tech Uncensored. Have fun and stay safe.